ladies and gentlemen. My name is Petr Kolář. I used to work as a Czech diplomat in some foreign missions and here in Ministry of Foreign Affairs as well, and I have the privilege to be the moderator of this distinguished panel, which is called Russia, a non-democratic power on the world stage? Question. So let me very briefly introduce our panelists. I'll start from the right side. I don't need to introduce Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who is really today one of the most famous Russians, I believe. I don't need to also introduce Professor Andrey Zubov, famous historian and friend of mine. I suppose that everybody knows the former president of Lithuania, Vytautas Landsbergis. Thank you for being with us. And last but not least, there is a Daniel Baer, representative of OSCE in Europe. So let's start. We have the title, Russia, a non-democratic power of the world on the world stage. So is that true? Is that like that? Or maybe we can start with Mikhail, and I will ask him what is his perception of today's Russia, how he would describe Russia. Is that power, and is that non-democratic power, or authoritarian power, or what's your view of your country?
Я уже говорил вчера в своем выступлении, что в моем представлении сегодня в России, несомненно, авторитаризм. И этот авторитаризм начинает сползать в сторону уже такой более-менее нормальной диктатуры. Мне очень хотелось бы верить, что до этого не дойдет. Сильная ли эта власть? На мой взгляд, нет. Потому что такая система управления в такой огромной стране, как наша, она не позволяет реально заниматься управлениями теми процессами, которые должны быть управляемы в стране. Таким образом, мы имеем странную ситуацию. С одной стороны, авторитаризм, с другой стороны, слабое государство. Вот, наверное, это описание сегодняшней России.
As I've mentioned in my presentation yesterday, what we're having in Russia today is definitely an authoritarian state, slowly but steadily drifting towards dictatorship.
Спасибо.
Will this happen? I hope not. The extent to which Russia is power also leaves questions, because in our contemporary system of administration, it's very difficult to be on the lookout for everything what's going on in this vast country. So, authoritarian, yes. Power, yes. And this would be the answer to the question.
Слабое государство.
It's a weak state.
Okay, thank you very much. Andrey, vy извините, на английском. Do you agree with that? You are a historian, so from the historical perspective, what's new here today with Russia? Is there anything new, or is that just a traditional model of behavior of the power in Russia, or what we can see today?
Yes, as to me, it's a habit to say now that Russia always was non-democratic power, non-liberal power. Russia always, during Tsars, during communist regime and after it, it is continue its shape as authoritarian or maybe totalitarian state, and the small periods of democracy is only the turbulent times and the change of dynasty, of one authoritarian dynasty to another one. I am not totally disagree with this idea. Yes, of course, for a long time, Russia was an authoritarian state. But as a historian, I absolutely informed that we have also different patterns of Russian state. For example, in medieval history, it's Novgorod or Pskov state. In the turbulent times in 17th century, we see that all bureaucracy failed to do anything, and only people's revolt succeeded to liberate Russia from intervention and in a disaster. And after in the second part of the 19th century, we had a wonderful example of building of new form of state with some liberal elements, and after 1905 with democratic institutions. And one more feature, a Russian pre-communist state ruined in 1917, but Russian culture, which was organized during this liberal period after Alexander II, prospered in the Silver Age in Russia and then in immigration. So I think that we have two ways and two patterns, and we have no obligation to follow authoritarian pattern. It's only the problem of historical will of our nation. And I am sure, and my obligation is, to help our country to search the democratic way for its future.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrey. Now, let's try to use the angle from outside. Mr. President, as a Lithuanian from the neighborhood, how do you perceive the current Russia? Is that power, is that threat, is that dangerous power, or is that weak power we don't need to be afraid of? And what we can expect? Start to move slowly towards the future.
Russia today is dangerous at first for itself.
Interesting.
But then, of course, for every neighbor. In our global world, the whole world is a neighbor. So the world peace is endangered. I see Russia of Putin is rightly defined in a program as non-democracy. It stems not from opinions, but facts and cases. In general, any non-democracy may contain at least two links. When still sliding down from previous stage of pre-democracy, or when developing strongly towards complete anti-democracy. That is the case for Russia today. That's development. Ukraine of Yanukovych looked as oppressive post-democracy, but due to the Maidan liberation movement, became at least pre-democracy, even striving to democratic Europe. Russia of Yeltsin was pre-democracy. But after that great chance was lost, appeared shifted by Mr. Putin via non-democracy to anti-democracy. Is denouncing democracy. There was a famous expression that old host your human rights and democracies, it is the old colonialism. We are denouncing it. It is not for us. Well, then you are putting yourself in a special place of non-democracy. Non-democracy means the war. It's exactly here. Democracies means peace, and non-democracy means the war. Non-democracy means the announcement of judiciary and a state of democratic law. It means the oppression and terror, both internal and external. Everything is case for today's Russia. It means replacement of dispute by an order forcibly imposed by a ruler or ruling clan. You know, maybe you remember this famous expression by open discussion to the nation: guilty is that boy who was beaten. And all moral valuation is included then. Guilty is that who is beaten. Khodorkovsky was in jail, he was guilty because of that fact that he is in jail. It makes him guilty, and so on. Any Ukraine is guilty because Ukraine is beaten. If Ukraine is resisting, it is bad. Non-democracy means that brain and mental work is turned to justify your instinctive animosities plus primitive desires. And then we are not so far from Stone Age in the heads. Kremlin, they are, of course, the court philosophers and doctrinaires, formula producers of Kremlin, and serving exactly this request of supreme consumer. What we need is the clear vision and true word, not maneuvering among the big and smaller lies. We could seek for some grounds, of course. Non-democracy of Putinist Russia is once again based on two predispositions, political and psychological, both due to that, what happened and what continues to happen. Usurpers of powers, it's always and everywhere. Would they appear from traditional communist or mutant communist roots as believers in force, violence, and oppression, are living their biological terms in a constant fear of changes, which may bring a damned democracy, what means in turn an accountability and responsibility of managers to be checked and proved. Those dreamers about they are then maybe seen by themselves as well as limited in terms. It is a question to be or not to be, with responsibility of interim power service provider. They are power services. They are providers of power services, but to realize that this interim stage is very much uncomfortable. Dreamers about eternity of their powers naturally don't want any changes and call them plots of enemies. Such are the stagnation policies of usurpers, denouncing the very parliamentary democracy. I will quote again, that's not for us, parliamentary democracy. Was said by one of two rulers of Russia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I think that if we look at into the recent history, it's true that there are two views. Our view of changes in 90s in Russia, where we perceive it in the West as a democratization, and opening up the society. For many Russians, contrary, as I had a chance to talk to them, for many of them this time was a time of chaos. They felt that they are losing dignity because they are weak and they are not receiving their salaries, there is nothing in the shops. And then Mr. Putin came and started, after Yeltsin, he started to offer them some kind of the dignity again and something what they could feel like human beings. But that was not about their civic dignity, their civic rights. Many of them started to be real consumers because they finally got the money, they got their salaries, they could buy goods in the shops, and they started to live better. Now, and then I came to Russia in 2010 and I saw the development in 11 and 12 with the civic movement there, with the middle class appearing on the streets and protesting against abusement of the power by Mr. Putin. And then again, something happened. So from the international perspective, what OSCE, or you, Daniel, you as a representative of OSCE, what you could say about the current Russia? Is that dangerous power? Is that weak power? Do we need to be, or how we should deal with them? What would you recommend?
Well, first of all, I'm a representative of the U.S. government to the OSCE, but
yeah,
just so that I'm clear about who I work for. You know, I think one way is to define what Russia is today on the global stage, and another is and we should be clear, I think, about when we talk about Russian policies on the world stage, we're talking about the Kremlin, because the Kremlin's policies aren't actually in the interest, in my view, of Russians. But what the Kremlin has on the world stage and what it doesn't have, and I think one of the things that it doesn't have is a compelling global vision that can be sold factually to people around the world. It doesn't have a global vision for peace and prosperity. It tries now to peddle this leader of a new conservative bloc in the world, but that's not a global vision. It's arguably not a terribly sincere vision either, but it doesn't meet the threshold of being a serious ideological offer for a global community. And one of the things, Professor Zubov and I had a chance this morning to participate in a conversation about Russian propaganda, and one of the things I came away from thinking about that, there were a lot of conversations about, you know, well, maybe the Orthodox Christian piece fits with this piece fits with that piece, and I think somebody might look at us, and I was part of this group, and think, oh, isn't that cute how they so earnestly try to make sense of the ideological offer of the Kremlin today. And I think maybe we should spend rather less time being earnest about trying to make sense of what is arguably not a particularly sincere or coherent ideological offer from Russia, and redouble our efforts to be very earnest about advancing the alternative, which is a rules-based order that is grounded in rules that respect the inherent dignity of every person. And in that respect, I think we should be very committed over the long run to holding Russia accountable for participating in that project. It is in the interest of ordinary Russians that Russia participate in that project, and in the interest of citizens of all of our own countries. And to pick up on something that Professor Zubov said, and that several others have, a point they have made, I often hear European colleagues talk about Russians in a way that if you removed the word Russian and replaced it with Neanderthal, the sentence would still make sense. Oh, they're Russians, they're always going to be Russian, they're never going to be able to have a real democracy, etc. And I think we should absolutely reject that. Part of showing somebody respect is holding them accountable for living up to standards, and we should show the Russian people, certainly, the respect that we would expect to be shown, and demand that respect for human rights, rule of law, even though it may seem a practical distance from where Russia is today, that is what we expect of Russia, and that is what is in Russia's long-term interest.
Well, thank you, Daniel. Mr. Brent, yeah?
Could I take your point, your
Please.
remark, for a very simple comment? Our topic is democracy and its discontents. Let us think about such a topic, freedom and its discontents. It is what about you are asking. Or to say life in dignity and human sense and its discontents. Just now we had a panel on decline of democracy. Why? How it can be debated out of decline of sound reasons.
Thank you. But honestly, if we see today that Mr. Putin, President of Russia, is supported by about 80% of the citizens of Russia in things which he is doing now, the question is, what's wrong? Why we have totally different perception than them? What should be done in different way, if there is anything possible to be done in different way? I came to Russia in 2010 when President Obama started with his program of reset with Russia. That was shortly after the Bucharest summit and then invasion of Georgia. Was that right, to ignore what happened in Georgia and to start with the reset? Was that the right gesture in right time to offer the hand to communicate? Is it like that Russians, or actually not Russians, but Putinists understood it as a gesture of weakness and our stupidity? You are from Russia, so please tell me, what do you think about this constant effort from the West to open up, to offer some cooperation, to ignore some terrible things like invasion of Georgia and to start with the reset afterwards? And then wasn't it like an invitation for Mr. Putin to try it again in Crimea, in Ukraine? So what we shall expect from him, how we should react, what would be your advice? What shall we do to prevent situations like that if we are not ready to go into the open war?
У Европы и в целом у евроатлантической цивилизации, в общем, не так много сил для того, чтобы что-то сделать с Россией.
Fairly speaking, neither Europe nor European Atlantic Union does not have enough power to do anything serious to Russia.
То, что для нас в России в конце советских лет было важно, помимо того, что у нас полки в магазинах были пустые, а на Западе они были полные. Это были ценности, которые, как мы думали, на Западе являются фундаментальными.
What was important to us at the end of the Soviet period, when the store shelves were empty, there was something left inside of us which we thought was very important. That were the values that we had thought that the West cherishes and fundamentally supports.
Мы полагали, что права человека на Западе являются чем-то абсолютно фундаментальным, а ценность человеческой жизни по сравнению с тем, что у нас в Советском Союзе было, велика.
We had considered that human rights were a fundamental concept for the Western world. We thought that the value of a human life was the most important thing in this world.
К сожалению, за прошедшие 20 лет это впечатление стало размываться.
Unfortunately, during the last 20 years, this perception has started to blur.
Мы узнали, что такое business as usual, и что такое прагматичная политика.
We learned the concept business as usual. We got to know what pragmatic politics is all about.
Ну, если особых ценностей нет, то тогда можно все.
Which means that if there are no values that are real values, that means that everything else is allowed.
То, что мог бы сделать сейчас Запад, это вернуться к ценностям и говорить с нынешним руководством России в терминах ценностей.
What the West could and should do is go back to the concept of values and speak about values to the present-day leadership of Russia.
И действовать в соответствии с ценностями.
And act in accordance with the perception of such values.
Я думаю, что мои сограждане не так быстро бы в это поверили, но спустя некоторое время поверили бы обязательно.
My compatriots would not start wholeheartedly believing it overnight, but after a while they would start to believe in it again.
А когда вы видите привлекательные ценности, то вы хотите меняться сами. И, по-моему, это единственный путь.
And every time you see attractive values, the values that are appealing to you, you start to change towards these values. And I think it's only natural.
Спасибо, Mikhail. Andrey, would the power in Russia, we speak now about Putin's Russia,
Yes.
would they really understand if we would follow the advice of Mikhail?
As to me, the main problem of Russian democracy is not the problem of the West. So the West ought to follow its values. Of course, everybody ought to follow real fundamental values. It's clear enough. And it's also clear enough that everybody, from time to time, go away from this way of values. It's a pity, but it's fact. But the problem is that if we speak about democratic countries of Europe or United States, they from time to time make terrible mistakes. But in general, they try to return back to the path of values. And as to speak about, for example, Nazi Germany, the destruction of values is the principal idea of Nazism or of communism. Morality is nothing for Lenin or Stalin, and they proclaimed it, and Hitler also proclaimed it. I made you free from morals. You remember these words of Hitler. So the difference between totalitarian states and not totalitarian states of Europe is in this attitude to morals. Morals as absolute goal, which not always can be followed, and the morals as no goal and also only an unpleasant burden which ought to be thrown away. It's the main distinction. And after 1991 in Russia, you see, we found very interesting situation. During the communist regime, people in Russia, Russian population, all Soviet population, lived in a poor, unpleasant, unliberal conditions and materially very poor conditions. And, but they supposed, because of propaganda, that they lived in a great country, the center of the, one of the two centers of the world, in superpower, and they struggled for some great ideal principles, principles of social equality, etc. When Soviet Union disappeared, communist regime collapsed, Russian people saw that it was only a miracle, nothing like this. We have no strong state, we have no strong army, so we lost. and Western country won the Cold War, won this great battle. And as to Western countries, of course, for me as Russian, it's easier to say that other countries made bad things, not we. It's even in family quarrels situation always the same. But I say a different thing. Western countries follow the example in the attitude to the former Soviet Union, as they followed toward Nazi Germany after the Second World War. After the destruction of Nazi regime, they accepted Germany into the Union of European countries. They made no reparations. They asked no reparations from Germany and Italy, but they gave them money through the Marshall Plan. They take no 1 square kilometer from German or Italian territory after the Second World War. So it was absolutely different principle, non-Versailles principle of organization of the world. And the result of this new policy is well known. Germany and Italy turned to be integral part of European Union, and it's impossible to imagine war now between, for example, France and Germany. And towards the former Soviet Union, West countries began to start the same policy. They invited Russia to J7 bloc. They invited Russia to Europe. They began conversation about some collaboration between NATO and Russia. And during Yeltsin period, these ideas were accepted, maybe not very frankly, by Russian Yeltsin's elite. The problem is of from another point. The problem is that Russian population, when they saw that their lack of these illusion values of great power, they found nothing in their life to compensate this disappearance of illusion, because they continued to live as poor as they were, with all the difficulties which were before. Only a small part of Russian population accepted some benefits from new forms of life. And they had no illusion and no reality. And great frustration was the result in this situation. What it was necessary to do? Absolutely the same thing which was done in former communist Europe. It was necessary to go this way of decommunization. You know very well these steps of decommunization in Eastern Europe. It's legal succession with pre-communist state. It is restitution of property. It is changing in historical patterns and illustration, close collaboration with former immigrants, etc., etc. Nothing like this was done in former Soviet countries and in Russia, also. People saw themselves without real property, without real benefits from new form of life, and without illusion. And what did Putin 2 or 3 years ago and succeeded this year after Ukrainian war, in the state of Ukrainian war? He returned illusion of great power to Russian people. He did not give Russian people some real values, property or something like this, but he returned Russian people to the state of illusion thinking. And he succeeded. This 85% of support is support for former Soviet illusion. People found themselves again in the former Soviet ideological reality, in the reality of Cold War. It was twice illusion, because today's Russia is not a Soviet Union. It's a weak state without any possibilities to struggle with the Western real struggle. But people can't understand it. Russian people can't understand it. But I hope they will understand it in the nearest future. But the main task of Russian elite, of Russian leading circle, of politicians is to give real values, not illusion, but real values to population, to follow the example of East European countries in the process of decommunization. And I am sure that if these opposition forces would have enough inner force to do so, authoritarian state will disappear and we'll see Russia in the company of democratic, liberal European countries in future.
Well, yeah, I'm very pleased, Andrey, that you are optimistic.
It's my tragedy, I'm sorry.
No, it's your great advantage, especially in this current world, to be optimistic, to see the glass half full, not half empty. Well, I think that we all would agree that it would be great to have inside of Russia people who would follow or would share the same values like us and who could create the atmosphere step by step in the country that once Russia would be not only the partner but the ally.
Yes.
Well, I don't know in what perspective we are talking, but tell me, what shall we do, representatives of Western world, United States, European Union countries, our institutions, to persuade them that if we disagree with something, or if we criticize something what's wrong, we criticize it in their own interest. We don't criticize it because we want to mentor them, we want to punish them, that we want to do something good for them. I had a problem, I see Minister Schwarzenberg here sitting in the front row. I had a problem to explain that he is not anti-Russian when I served the ambassador. That his family supported, his father and his grandfather supported Russians who escaped from the Bolshevik Russia. So this is not anti-Russian if we do something what actually should be perceived as our sincere effort to help them, to be normal country. But how we can persuade them? We are losing. We are losing this propagandistic war. So far you mentioned 85% of people who are
for Mr. Putin's politics.
Yeah, so there is something wrong. We are not targeting them properly. We don't know how to explain it. We don't know how to persuade them.
Dear Mr. Ambassador, I want to say that you are not wrong. I tried to explain, maybe not clear because of my poor English, that Europe and the Western world did what they ought to do toward Russia after the Cold War period. You did everything in general. Maybe in some details there were mistakes, but we're people and we make mistakes. But in general, your general attitude to Russia was absolutely right, positive, just as the attitude to Nazi Germany after the Cold World War. But our attitude was different. We had no our at the Konrad Adenauer in the Russian country. We had no people who want really decommunization and succeeded in realize this project. You see, 25 years passed after the end of the communism, and we see all these Lenins in all squares of all Russian cities and towns. It's impossible to imagine. It's impossible to imagine. And this is only a clear sign of more deep and serious problem which we have. It is a problem of our elite, not European. You help us, and I am sure that you will continue to help us in this process. And late President Havel was one of the persons who did much in this way, I know it. And we thank him and Mr. Minister Schwarzenberg and many other people in Czech Republic. But it's up to us, it's up to us. It's our drama, it's our problem that we even fail to understand the problem of decommunization and liberation from totalitarian past, which is so necessary for each country which want to build some democratic state after authoritarian or totalitarian past. You understood it in Czech Republic, but we failed to do so in Russia.
Thank you. Mr. President, current policy, kind of approach of the West, I mean European Union, NATO, United States, is that proper way how we deal with Russia now, or what you would suggest? What should be changed to help them to understand that we could be even partners? But I think that now we have to be firm, we have to be firm, we have to be strong, we have to show our unity. What do you think?
We should be realistic, and the lack of realism in the West is evident. Look at the situation after Russia of Putin, of course it is not about Russian people yet, Russia of Putin turned to anti-democracy, to aggression, to annexations and occupations. So the old imperialism, but what is the result worldwide? The world system of prevention of big wars, it was the United Nations, lays in ruins. It is ruined totally, together with not respected anymore, likely outdated principles of living in peace, of peaceful coexistence, on what was based this idea of United Nations, no more wars, we are all cooperating, and so on. Putinist Russia said it is not for us. We want to govern, not cooperate. The cooperation is refused through the charters, conventions, commitments of no value now. And that should be understood, essentially. What is not? It is too fearful to understand the new situation, what appeared now, and how to learn to live in that new situation. No new Cold War, it is too less to say. New Stone Age maybe is coming with nukes in hand, not with stone axes. That is the situation. And what to say about, I mentioned it, if there is an idea of discontents of freedom and its discontents, maybe in Europe it is felt as well. Part of people don't value freedoms, or they would like the freedoms without responsibilities, freedoms when candies are given for free, with no work, and so on. For some time, the European civilization, that capitalist, democratic civilization, was on the wrong track. Was on the wrong track. What to say now about the Homo sapiens, about his ability to rethink what is needed, to rethink such gimmicks as growth. Of what? What is growing? Your consumerism of welfare. In what? In spirit or in pocket? You are looking only on the pocket, not to your soul. Is there welfare or only jealousy egoism and grudginess. The safe environment, no, stop kidding, the safe environment. It is going out and out from our global even life. And again, those egoistic liberties without responsibilities. Who wants to think now about personal, of families, societies, responsibilities on their own today? No, the responsibility is government.
Well, it's quite curious that sometime when I see the Russian and hear the Russian propaganda from Kremlin and his, from Putin's journalists, they are very often using the form of traditional values. We in the liberal Europe, we are, on the margin of the disaster because we lost them, and they know what are the traditional good values of the Christianity, and so on. No, I just, Mr. President, thank you very much. I just want to know, don't you, as a representative of the US government in OSCE, sometime feel that organizations like that are used by current Russian regime from, well, sometimes like useful idiots? Do you think that this is still something what has a concrete value and we can work with that? You must believe in that if you represent your country and that, but tell me.
Sure. I mean, I think honestly, it's incumbent upon each of us not to play the part of being a useful idiot. And certainly, I personally endeavor not to be that person. But I mean, I think, the OSCE, more than any other regional organization, is grounded in a set of principles which are fundamental values. And the idea that we should be engaging in international politics starting from the premise of common commitments to principles that are a sustainable long-term framework for that politics is as arguably more urgently needed today than it has been in recent memory. And so I don't think that the forum itself is out of date. I think that it is true that we have seen the Russian Federation use not only particular fora but international law in a rather cynical way as a weapon rather than as a common project, and that's something that we have to be guarding against. But you asked the question of, how should we engage with Russia? And I think there, it has, in order to not be useful idiots, we have to, yes, impose costs when the Kremlin breaks the rules to which we're all committed. Yes, be prepared to engage, but be prepared to engage in measurable, action-oriented ways first. A great deal of trust has been destroyed. Arguably, a bunch of delusions or illusions amongst those of us in the so-called West have been shattered. We need to enter a phase of trust building again. And that means that we need to engage in concrete ways, and we need to measure success based on outcomes and actions. And we are back in a verify then trust rather than trust but verify mode of engagement. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't stay open to it. So we should have costs and engagement. And as important as any of those interactions with the Russian government, we should continue to engage with the Russian people. Because in the long run, that's the conversation that we want to be having. The current Russian government does not represent the interests of the Russian people. The propaganda may distort their understanding of the outside world, but we should do everything we can to maintain a values-based conversation, a human rights-based conversation with the Russian people. The $100 million question to me is a question that Mr. Khodorkovsky raised last night, which is, has Putin gone too far so that there's no fallback? And Mr. Khodorkovsky made the argument that he has no fallback position. And if that's the case, that's a okay, then well, what and what then? And that's a question that I don't want to answer. But perhaps
no, thank you. That's a very important point. We all know that official Russians are very often advocating their steps by using their Trojan horses. In our European Union, we have political parties, politicians who serve them perfectly well for this purpose. Sometimes they try to do with the international organizations. So it's very important to be really clear, transparent, tough, and don't to be so easily abused. And you mentioned that we need to concentrate for Russian people. So now, Russian people, what we should understand if we say Russian people, how we should work with them. Mikhail, you are optimists, as I noticed when we had a discussion today. You believe that there is a healthy spirit in your country, and then there are people who are just in this moment maybe a bit confused, I say it diplomatically, but you believe that it's possible to wake them up. At the same time, we need to also think about Mr. Putin, how long he can confuse them in future. What shall be done with Putinists, and what shall we do with Russians, with the Russian nation? Education, journalism, what's your suggestion?
За прошедшие годы в России произошли изменения в противоположных направлениях.
Over the last few years, Russia has seen changes leading in the opposite direction.
С одной стороны, без всяких сомнений, в России укрепилось гражданское общество.
On the one hand, and without any doubt, the civic society took root in Russia.
Такого масштаба волонтерских проектов, как мы видели в последние годы, не было никогда.
There has never before been anything like those huge volunteer-based projects that we have become witnesses to recently.
Москва преобразилась как город усилиями москвичей.
Moscow has become a different kind of a city, mostly through the efforts of the Muscovites.
То же самое, пускай в меньших объемах, происходит в других российских городах.
Similar things, albeit to a smaller extent, take place in other Russian cities.
Мы можем убедиться, что российская экономика на сегодняшний день не совсем та, как они представляют.
We have more than one reason to believe that the real state of the Russian economy is not exactly what it is being thought of.
Помимо нефти и газа, в российской экономике производится огромное количество других товаров.
Separate and apart from oil and natural gas, the Russian economy produces a large number of other products.
И если вы посмотрите на структуру российского ВВП, она иная, чем можно судить из газетных выступлений.
If you take a look at the structure of the Russian GDP, you will see that it's different from the way it's trying to be presented in the press.
С другой стороны, в политической сфере Россия сделала огромный шаг назад.
But on the other hand, in the political life and sphere, Russia has taken a giant step backwards.
Мы практически в этой части вернулись в советские годы, как с точки зрения свободы слова, так с точки зрения вообще прав человека.
In this regard, we have almost made it all the way back to the Soviet days, both from the point of view of the freedom of speech, as well as from the point of view of freedoms and human rights in general.
Такой диссонанс не может быть устойчивым.
Such a disparity cannot be of a long-term nature.
Для его поддержки власти пришлось применять такие сильные методы, как военная авантюра.
In order to maintain this disparity, the powers had to use their strongest weapons, such as, for example, the military adventure.
И это действительно одна из последних мер.
And in fact, this is one of the last means in the arsenal.
Что можно и нужно делать, на мой взгляд?
Back to the question of what can and needs to be done.
Надо воспринимать российский народ как своих соседей. Не всегда приятных, но соседей.
You must look at the Russian people as your neighbors, not always the nicest of them, but still the neighbors.
С которыми придется жить на одном континенте всегда.
That you are bound to be living side by side with on one single continent.
И обращаться надо с каждым человеком так, как он заслуживает по его собственным поступкам.
And you should treat every citizen of Russia according to the weight of his or her own action or lack thereof.
И, конечно, не надо делать вид, что человек, который вышел из дома соседа с серебряными ложками и принес их к вам в дом, сделал что-то нормальное.
Here's an example what you should not do. Just the way you would not welcome in your own house a person who stole some silverware from the table of his neighbor, you shouldn't pay a warm welcome to those who are taking things stolen from their own people to your country.
Есть два возможных пути. Первый путь – это изоляция России.
I see two possible ways of going forward. One is a complete isolation of Russia.
То, что было в годы Холодной войны.
Something that we all were witnesses to during the Cold War.
Но куда тогда вы толкнете Россию? Будет ли хорошо, если Россия станет чем-то напоминающим Северную Корею или тем более развалится на отдельные куски?
But what would you then see Russia willing to do? Do you want Russia to be somewhat of the North Korean type, or what's even worse, see Russia disintegrate into several components?
Я боюсь, что для Европы в этом не будет ничего хорошего.
I don't think there's anything good about this scenario for Europe.
Другой путь – интеграция. Через все препоны, через все неприятности все равно взаимная интеграция.
The second option is integration. In spite of all the obstacles, in spite of all objective difficulties, pursue this integration forward.
Российская молодежь, российский средний класс должен получить возможность спокойно ездить в Европу и возвращаться назад в Россию.
Russian youth, Russian middle class must have an opportunity of moving freely to and from Europe.
Это достаточно богатые люди, вам не придется их кормить.
These people are quite well off. You will not have to spend extra money feeding them.
Но иного пути наладить хорошие отношения с соседом, кроме как ходить друг к другу в гости, я не знаю.
But I'm simply not aware of any other way of coming to terms with your neighbors rather than seeing each other at each other's place every once in a while.
Но еще раз хочу сказать, конечно, отношение к тем людям, которые ведут себя не так, как принято в нормальном обществе, должно быть иным, вне зависимости от того, насколько выгодно с ними иметь дело.
But at the same time, remember that dealing with people who misbehave according to your own standards in a way that plays into their hands should not be acceptable either.
Я думаю, другого рецепта нет.
There is no other recipe.
Oh. Thank you. So if I understood it well, we should concentrate to those Russians who are at the first stage, to those Russians who are willing to have a dialogue with us, those who don't want to isolate.
Я думаю, это был бы очень правильный путь.
I think it would be a very correct way of putting it.
И помогите Украине экономически.
And another recipe, i.e. request, help the Ukraine economically.
Okay. Well, I remember the speech of our former president, our first, after the Bolshevik Revolution, our first president, Václav Havel, who in his speech in the US Congress said that if you want to help us, please help Russia to be the normal country. So I'm paraphrasing. Okay, if we speak about the future, about youth, about middle class, about civic society in Russia, what channels we can use to communicate with them, how we can encourage them, how we can give them some hope that we are not putting them all together in one basket, so with Putin, like that they are Russians and it's lost. In this country, in the Czech Republic, we have some tradition. I mentioned it today with so-called Russian action of our President Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk in 20s of the last century. And there was quite a huge diaspora of anti-Bolsheviks, Russians who escaped from Soviet Union, from Russia, and they established their free university here. Do you think that there is that this is the way we should help those people if they are not in the moment able to exist properly at home, to live and work outside and to send those messages to their own people? Because we are foreigners. If we are trying to advise something, we could be perceived as that we are lecturing them and mentors. It's better if Russians are telling Russians that it's better to live in normal, free society with the rule of law, with the liberal values. They maybe would understand it better to their own people.
If it's a question.
Yes, please, Andrey, whoever, both of you.
Just some months ago, I was a professor in one of the Moscow universities. I was dismissed from it in the end of June. And that's why I knew rather well the situation between our in the circle of the students of Moscow and the situation with young people in Russia. Just now, patterns of education changed, are in the state of change towards almost Soviet totalitarian indoctrination. A year ago, 2 years ago, the situation was different in Moscow, in Russian universities, in Russian schools. And now I met my former students and asked them, how you continue your studies now? Situation turned to be very bad, answered me. Just when I'm ready to leave to Prague, Moscow to Prague, one of my students told me that she was expelled from the university, from GIMO, because of some ideas which are not connected with official ideology. So you see, now the problem of education, the problem of organization of our young generation is of great importance. And you, Mr. the Ambassador, remember this Masaryk action. It was one of the most brilliant events toward Russia in the 20th century. The problem is that it's not well known in Russia. Among other very deep and interesting ideas, for example, nobody knows in Russia that among 14 points of Woodrow Wilson, which he declared in 1918 in the Congress of the United States, the second point was full about Russia. And the main idea of this point was that we ought to help our Russian brothers and sisters to search the way to the future which they like themselves. And nevertheless, we ought to help them and aid and give them all necessary aid. Nobody in Russia knows this, and everybody supposes that America only thinks about some annihilation of Russia. So it is necessary to organize maybe new Masaryk action, an action by name of Masaryk, not only in Czech Republic, but maybe in the whole European Union, maybe in the whole Western Union, to help young Russian people, young Russian scholars and science to take good education, good formal, professional education, and also political education, moral education. I know my students who studied for 1 or 2 years abroad in Western countries, almost all of them, though when they left Russia, they were of different views toward West, but all of them returned with a deep impression, positive impression of the Western system of values, though not everybody accepts everything, of course. And I think that now, when Russian political regime turned to be authoritarian and despotic again, with one textbook for history, one textbook for Russian literature, we ought to think about alternative education or additional supplement education, maybe magistrate education after bachelor education in Europe for those people who want to take it. And of course, not all of these young people are rich enough to pay for this education. I know well that many of them came from intelligent but poor families from Russian province, for example. And they sent money from our Moscow. They take some money in the university and send money to their parents. So of course it's necessary to think about some fellowship or about some other things. But maybe this is the best way to improve situation in Russia. It is investment to the future. And Masaryk hoped himself and Parliament of Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia at that time, that in 1 or 2 decades these young men returned to new non-communist Russia and would build a new democratic state close to Europe, a part of Europe. It was not a successful idea. Communism regime prolonged much longer than Thomas Masaryk supposed. But now I am sure, and I absolutely agreed with Mikhail Borisovich, that political situation is now in very fast development. And this investment, which you do now to Russian youth, will return to both you and us in some years, maybe in 1 decade, with very positive result. And we will be one political nation, European nation, in the 10 years, if we and you join our forces to build new Russia.
Well, it sounds even more optimistic than I would expect in such an optimist like you. I'm not sure if we are equipped with the mics. If I open the floor for the audience to ask questions, do we have some microphones here? Okay, wonderful. That's now time is running, so I want to use the opportunity to give you a chance to ask questions. But before, excuse me, gentlemen, before you ask your question, I want to tell you that here is in the audience Dean of Faculty of Philosophy from Charles University over there. Could you stand up, please? Miriam Fridová, who actually the faculty proposed to start with the Russian action #2. So maybe you can then tell us what's your suggestion. But please, floor is yours.
I'm a Russian staying here. And adding to what was said regarding Masaryk's action, I think that we have already to thank the Czech government for the work the Czech government is doing to Russians and to Russian youth. Just for your information, the number of Russian students at Czech universities, Czech high schools, getting free education for the last 10 years has grown 10 times. Now, It was before 10 years, it was about 400. Now it is 4,200 students who have entered the Czech universities and Czech high schools this year, most of them free of charge. Then this year, a special school continued to work, a language school was awarded the special rights of Mr. Akuniak, was given the name of Mrs. Gorbanevskaya. I think this name is known to everybody. Yes, that's why the only suggestion, more and more dialogue, what already Mikhail has said. Just we have to have with Russian more and more dialogue, more and more. Don't pressure on Russians. The more pressure you use, the more counter pressure it will evolve. We have to cooperate. We have to have more and more dialogue with the youth. And that's why the Russian youth has to thank the Czech government for the opportunities they give them to get education here in Czech Republic.
So thank you very much. Well, the message is clear. We have to infiltrate them. Okay, if you allow me to this lady to be the first to, please tell us if you can briefly just what's the suggestion.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to thank Professor Zubov for introducing so eloquently the Masaryk program, because I was afraid that I was just going to sound way too Pollyannish by bringing up my plan. But the plan is that Faculty of Arts of Charles University, together with Masaryk University in Brno, would really like to establish a firm study program that would be all taught in Russian, that would mostly be drawing on Russian academics and scientists who would come here and teach. And of course, we would like to draw Russian students as well, but the idea is that we would connect between our Czech students and the Russian students, everything taught in this language. And the idea is that it really should be interdisciplinary as well. So, you know, from political science to history to philology, to sociology, all these fields are taught at our universities, both in Prague and Brno, and I'm ready to start building this program. So also here publicly, I would really love to invite both you and Mr. Khodorkovsky to come and visit our faculty and talk some more about the specifics of this first step toward the dialogue and engaging, I guess, the Russian people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please, floor is yours. Mike, yes, could you please give us the microphone?
Hello, I am Vladimir Lame from Albanian television. I have a question for Mr. Khodorkovsky, as I have listened so many different views from his side in opponency with Mr. Putin. So, related to foreign policy of Russian Federation, I want to ask Mr. Khodorkovsky regarding Kosovo. Mr. Putin justified his action in Crimea with the way how international actors resolve the question of Kosovo. Do you find any similarities between two cases, like Crimea and Kosovo, or is it a completely different case, according to your opinion?
Could you give the mic over there? Yeah, back in the stage. Valvoda, Kostka. Please.
Я не считаю, что действия по пересмотру поствоенных границ в Европе могут быть чем-то оправданы.
I generally do not believe that any action targeted at reconsideration of post-war borders in Europe can be justified in one way or the other.
Это слишком опасная, я бы сказал бы, и безответственная политика.
This is too dangerous and too irresponsible politics.
Я бы не хотел вдаваться сейчас в особенности другой политики, связанной с экспортом демократии силовым путем.
I would try not to dwell upon another phenomena that we're all witnessing, the export of democracy by means of military power.
Это иной разговор.
This is a subject for a different conversation.
И я думаю, что американскому обществу предстоит его проанализировать на своих выборах.
And I think the American society will have to analyze it as its own elections are looming in the distance.
То, что касается нас, то я лично считаю, что никакие территориальные споры не должны и не должны были привести к ссоре двух братских народов.
When I look at our situation, I think that no territorial dispute should ever have led to the rupture in the relations between the two brotherly nations.
Если бы меня спросили год назад, я бы сказал, что у России и Украины только один путь – это вместе в объединенную Европу.
If a question was asked to me a year ago, I would say that the Ukraine and Russia had one common path, and that is a path that leads towards an integrated Europe.
Если меня спросили бы сейчас, я бы сказал бы, что путь-то тот же, но теперь неизвестно, через сколько десятилетий мы его сможем возобновить.
Under the current circumstances, I would answer the same question similarly, with one caveat, that is, I do not know how many years or tens of years would pass before we find ourselves back on this way to Europe.
И это огромная ошибка.
And this, of course, was a tremendous mistake.
Okay. Rostislav Valvoda.
If I may, Rostislav Valvoda from People in Need. In this debate, it kind of seems as if there was one little Mr. Putin who somehow manages to oppress the Russian people and rallies even their support behind him, and then somehow opposes the West. Yet the picture is more complicated. Mr. Putin is rather successfully finding allies in the West. And it's not just extremist weirdos like Marine Le Pen or Nigel Farage or whoever you name them. It's not just these extremists. They hiring former German chancellors. They, for instance, inviting the president of this country for a personal trip in Rhodes that is sponsored by one of Putin's close allies, person who's been put on the sanction list. They are managing to sort of buy up mainstream politicians. And my question is, isn't the challenging thing about Russia the thing that it basically challenged the very values that we stand up on and makes us ask, are we really standing up for the values that we say we do? And what do we do about it? Thank you.
Well, I suppose this is the question targeted to President Landsbergis. You are representing the Europe here today, so please, European Union and...
Not put on me so big responsibility. I may to comment only. And one point is important. You did touch it, and sometimes it is touched. It is about alleged defense of fundamental values by Putinist team. Current stage of Russian soul is to be looked more carefully in. What is there? The fundamental value of all Christian civilization is love, 2,000 years. Where can you find now the promotion of love, of sympathy, of assistance, of commitment to your neighbor, to your brother? This society is full of anger, of animosity, xenophobic hatred to surrounding nations and between themselves. I remember I have had, maybe still have, many Russian friends. but sometimes they had a question, and like a naive complaint, why nobody loves us, Russians? What is, to be polite, you cannot say directly, but they always should be in mind, do you love your neighbors or not? And then ask about the love, sympathy, and support. So this alleged fundamental defense of fundamental rights is one more mask of the regime to confuse those naive or discontent in democracy in the West. But look, simply, very simply and simple things. Who loved Beslan children more? Those who captured them, calling for peace in Chechnya, or those who bombed them to end the uneasy situation as soon as possible. May I remind you the opportunities. I was nearer to those cases. After taking the hostages, of course, by terrorists, they are not justified. But Aushev from Ingushetia went, negotiated, and saved tens of those children. And then Matschadov from Chechnya was coming maybe to resolve the issue with those terrorists who have not been Chechens, by the way, to talk with them and to save the children. But what was the perspective? It was impossible for Kremlin that Maskhadov is able to resolve that issue better of Putin. And then it was ordered to finish by all possible means, and they were bombed. And you can continue with the team of Kursk, with those youngsters sent now to eastern Ukraine, who are buried without a sign in clandestine burials. Even mothers are not told where their sons are buried. Is that the fundamental values of mankind?
Mr. President, I think that we all agree that this is something what is not admired, definitely, by us. But we have some admirers. That was the question from Mr. Valvoda, asked about this kind of the Trojan horses in our words. Those who admire this style, those who admire Mr. Putin, those who are saying that liberal democracy is over. Let's follow this way of strong leader.
No, if they long slavery, they will be given. Yes, maybe they deserve slavery. As that boy, bad boy who was beaten, and therefore he is bad because he was beaten. So they will be beaten, and they want it.
Yeah, well, I think that we are just in the end of our time. So if organizers would not be against, then I use the last question. Please go ahead.
My name is
Trojan horses are very stupid.
They are used.
I would like to go back
They
to
have
the
a wooden
President.
head.
I'd like to go back to the President Havel pledge, to the joint session of UN Congress, which you have mentioned, which I had a privilege to be personally present. If you want to help us, and I mean the whole free world, help Russian, what I would like to hear from two gentlemen, Professor Zubov and Khodorkovsky, in your opinion, during the last 20 years, were there any key strategic mistakes or decisions which West didn't do or should have done that the situation would have been different? Not to change the history cannot be changed, but learn from it and do something in the future. Something which may be not possible today in view of the situation, but may be possible 2-3 years from now. One idea which you mentioned, integration and education, I think that should be key priority because education in the world is opening the borders. I'd like to hear your opinion if there is something which...
okay, I would, because we are under pressure of time, I would say because Professor Zubov already answered that question.
Yes,
he said it quite clearly, so we know his view, that, well, this is their homework. What we were doing relatively well. Well, we can doubt about it, but just this is his view, and we respect it. Mikhail, what's your view?
Я приведу только один пример.
I will only give you one example by way of answering your question.
Приход к власти такого человека, как Путин, как представителя силовых структур, был во многом результатом кризиса 1998 года.
The coming to power of a person such as Putin, and we know his secret services background, was only possible as a result of the complete disarray that the country fell into during the 90s.
Конкретно в 1998 году.
And in particular in 1999.
1998.
I'm sorry, 1998.
Этот кризис мог быть предотвращен всего лишь дополнительными 50 миллиардами долларов.
This crisis could have been averted at the cost of extra $10 billion.
50 миллиардов.
Excuse me. I must apologize. I hear practically nothing with the reverberating sounds. I'm sorry about that.
И я помню обсуждения, которые шли в то время с международными институтами по поводу выделения этих денег.
I clearly remember the essence of the negotiations that were underway back then with the international financial institutions.
Тогда эти деньги пожалели.
This money was not provided. It seemed like too much.
Понятно, что если бы этот кредит был предоставлен, сегодня бы Россия его уже давно отдала.
It's clear that had this loan been provided, Russia would long have paid it back by now.
И сегодня мы бы имели в России совершенно другое правительство и совершенно иную ситуацию.
And we would be dealing with in Russia with a totally different situation and a totally different government.
Почему я об этом сейчас вспомнил?
Why did I remember this right now?
Потому что сейчас точно такой же вопрос стоит в отношении Украины.
Because it's exactly in the same fashion that the question is being put about the Ukraine of today.
И, похоже, западные страны готовы опять наступить на те же самые грабли.
And it seems like the Western countries are fully prepared to make the same mistake again.
Будет очень обидно.
It would be very sad if this were to happen.
Okay, so thank you very much. This is quite clear message for the end of this session. We have to be firm. We have to be united. We have to be even strong enough to defend our values, but at the same time, we have to be open and look for some ways how to win together with the Russian people, not those who are with the Putinists. And we shouldn't lose Ukraine. Now, don't repeat the same mistake. Invest, 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 and work with them. Thank you very much. Sorry, Daniel, did you want to say something?